My story takes place 2 years ago, between the first containment in France. I was home alone in my small apartment working on something for my internship that I was stressed out about. It was the beginning of the afternoon around 2, I think. Somebody knocked on my door, but I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to open it up and it was a guy that I knew. Let's call him Jim. Jim and I had slept together a few times a few weeks before, until he had pushed me away without any explanation. We were still friends, but I was a little hurt by it. Was I really that bad? Had he gotten what he had wanted and wasn't interested anymore? I didn't dare ask the question because I was getting a little bit attached, and I preferred to wait for it to pass, especially since we were bound to run into each other again. Indeed, Jim had recently got a room in the flat of a friend of mine. The situation really was quite funny because he had stumbled upon the ad without knowing that I knew the other tenants, and my friend didn't know yet that I knew the new roommate. I was going to tell her about it in person when we had met again in college for our midterms. So again, I knew that I was going to see Jim at some point, but I didn't expect to run into him so soon after he had moved in, let alone during a surprise visit from him to my apartment. I asked him what he was doing there, and he said that he was bored at the dorm and was just passing through. I invited him in, and I was a bit uncomfortable because I still liked him, and we had left without any explanation about his rejection before he had moved in with my friend. We talked for a while about trivial things, but strangely enough, I still remember the main points. And then he wanted to show me a new kind of massage against my stress that he had seen on TikTok. I hesitated a bit as I was still uncomfortable. "Do you trust me?" he asked. I said yes. I sat on the floor and he touched my back for a while, and then again once I was lying down. I don't remember everything except that at one point, his arm was around my neck and I thought, I'm not sure that I can breathe. And then I blacked out. Of course, the memory of choking didn't come right back away. It took several months, but I'm trying to tell you the story in chronological order. When I came to, it was dark out. I was still on the ground and I was bleeding. I don't remember if I had noticed the injury right away, but I had a large hole in my right side with many cuts underneath. The events are pretty fuzzy in my memory, but I wondered where Jim had gone and why I was alone. I went to look in the hallway, but my keys, which are normally always in the lock, were missing. I found the spare and I looked outside. No one was there. And then I had my first stupid reflex. I thought, I'm hurt, I need to disinfect, and I started to take a shower. I think I fell asleep and had nightmares of being tortured and kidnapped in the shower, probably a way for my brain to try to warn me that something bad was happening. I then looked for my phone, which was also missing from the apartment. I was confused, probably drugged, I realized later. I decided to go to bed to resume the search after resting. I told myself, if I'm still hurt when I wake up, it must be real. It seemed very logical in my mind at that moment. When I woke up, my mind was already a little clearer, but I still wasn't totally myself. It was around 8 or 9 o'clock and I think I was still bleeding. I looked for my phone again and started to panic as I couldn't find it. I tried to calm down and I told myself that it was probably there somewhere. I just had to ask somebody to call me. I contacted my best friend, let's call him Tom, via Messenger through my computer. I still had a hard time unlocking my computer. I couldn't type my code. I think I was still drugged. Luckily though, Tom was online. He tried to call me on my phone, but no ringing could be heard in the apartment. I think he figured out that I wasn't in my right mind, because he called me on Messenger to see if I was okay. It was he who gave me the details of our conversation. I have almost no memory of it. I said, "If you think you've been hurt, do you call the fire department to the police first?" He freaked out and asked me to explain what was going on. I was very confused, but I think he got the gist of it. He asked, "Did Jim do this to you?" "I don't know, maybe." I was still in denial at that point. Tom called the police on me. He couldn't come to help me himself because he was studying in another city. As I waited for the cops to arrive, I began to realize that I had completely messed up the crime scene by touching everything looking for my phone. Not to mention the shower and the nap, which could have killed me in retrospect. I was still in no pain though. The hole in my side had started to hurt when I was taken care of by the paramedics that the cops had called when they saw the extent of my injuries. I had to undergo surgery as a result, and it took me months to accept that it was an attempted murder with a knife. I had a hole in my liver, and it was bleeding a lot. Luckily though, my other organs were not affected. While I was in the hospital, the cops came to take my statement and they took Jim into custody. Imagine the surprise of my friend and her roommates when they found out that the new roommate not only knew me, but was also accused of attacking and robbing me. 1 week after it all went down, when I got back out of the hospital, the first bad news were that the cops had not been able to retrieve the recordings from the surveillance cameras in my building, which had already been erased because the procedures had been too long. The next day, the policewoman in charge of the investigation told me that, of course, Jim denied having been at my place that day, and nobody was at the flat to confirm if he was indeed at home all day. "That's it for now. Go home to your parents and get some therapy." Great. Also, a big up to my psychologist, who was an incredible person and helped me out a lot. And then I waited. For a long time. I had to have the seals from my building analyzed for Jim's DNA. Without video or witnesses, it was the only way to prove that he was my attacker, or at least that he was in my apartment that day. It took 1.5 years to get the prosecutor's verdict. No further action. No identifiable DNA other than mine had been found at the crime scene. I probably destroyed everything with the shower. So there you have it. We can't pursue the investigation. I could never prove that it was Jim. I don't have any memory of the attack itself. I don't think I'll ever find them. But I have no doubt that Jim did this to me. I think if I ran into him, I would freeze like a rabbit in front of a car. Today, I'm much better, but I still suffer from PTSD. For a while, I couldn't drink alcohol because the drunken feeling reminded me of when I was going to be unconscious. Now I only panic when I'm with someone and have trouble breathing. I can't pull the blanket over my face if I'm in bed with my boyfriend, for example. And most of all, it makes me sick to know that Jim is free to live his life and to hurt someone else. I've been debating about whether to tell anybody about this, but I finally decided that it's been long enough. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago back in October. It happened in a very rural part of New Hampshire, like a side road on a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring outside and it had been raining for pretty much the entire day. My mom had just gotten back from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a big glass pane in the front so we can look out from the inside and somebody can look in from the outside. Through this window pane, I see a man. I didn't get a great look at him as I didn't have my long distance glasses on, The man noticed that I had seen him and waved as if trying to be friendly. For the rest of this story, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and thought about opening the door for Poncho Man, but I relented, as I couldn't properly see who it was. I didn't want to let a stranger into the house, so instead I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked what was up, and I explained to her that a man in a poncho was outside of our door and they wanted to talk to us. She went as white as a ghost. Immediately, she stopped getting ready, closed and locked the bedroom door, and started checking the windows to make sure that they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that as she was driving home, she had seen the Poncho Man. He had been standing motionless on the side of the main street. As soon as my mom had turned down a road, he started to walk, presumably to follow her. She said the encounter was weird but thought nothing more of it. Why would someone be out in the pouring rain down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. I started to panic as well, and my mom called my aunt. The two were like best friends, and they asked what she should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, and so we did. We proceeded to pace around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows to see if we could see the Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was angled, it was impossible to look at the front porch and see if he was still out there, but we were desperate for anything. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what we saw, and he agreed to do a scan around the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed there was something on the doorknob. I took it off, and it was a political ad for a candidate that was running for office. It's possible the Poncho Man was just campaigning for the candidate, but there are a lot of holes in that story. It was pouring outside, so why would he go door to door? Why would you go that route in such a rural neighborhood? The houses are so far apart you would barely make a dent on foot, and the time doesn't make sense either. Sure, I and my mom were home, but it was about 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so you would probably get no response from knocking anyway. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and had questioned him. The Poncho Man was able to ID himself, and he claimed that he was a political campaigner and was just knocking on doors for that reason. When probed further, conveniently enough, Poncho Man couldn't provide any other door signs, as the one he had left on our house was the last one. That makes the campaign story even more absurd. Our house is in the middle of the street. It's not like we were the last one by any means, so why wouldn't you bring enough for the whole street? Even the officer pointed this out to us and said that it was unusual behavior. Although the officer was suspicious of him, there wasn't anything that he could do about it, as there was no way to prove intent. He told us to be alert and to not hesitate to call if Poncho Man ever returned. Fast forward a few weeks, and I start noticing that a police car seems to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive. I got curious and I asked my mom about it, and she said that there were multiple break-ins into the houses down the road, and the police were doing a sort of sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but considering how Poncho Man had acted, I have a sinking feeling that they're connected. Thankfully, for the past few months, we've heard and seen nothing of Poncho Man. We got a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police had left the area where they were doing the sting. I hope that this whole situation is over and done with, and that I never have to meet Poncho Man. I'll start with some brief context. I had lived with an abusive male partner who didn't value my safety whatsoever. He got really mad if I didn't leave the door unlocked, and we lived in a not so great part of town. He was way older than me, and I was barely 18 at the time, and he was 26. Neither of us owned a car. He worked at Waffle House, and I was getting sick constantly, so keeping a job wasn't really easy for me. He liked both drugs and alcohol, and he traumatized me in regards to both of them. Blamed me for his usage and would attack me while on it. Fun fact, he said if I reported his conduct that he would blame me because he was the one on the substance, even though he held me down and forced it, not me. I digress. When I finally got the courage to leave for the last time, I did it while he was at work. I begged my mama to come help me with my necessities, stuff with emotional value and some clothing. Instead, she just called the cops. There had been a warrant for his arrest, and she got a police to escort me just in case. As soon as he got out, he immediately started messaging me from different and new numbers, threatening to hurt me and my family if I didn't go home with him. It didn't matter how much I blocked him, he just kept at it. I was scared, but I thought for the most part that it was safe. After all, he didn't have a car. I was wrong. About a week into this, he and his gun-owning friend had showed up, and he banged at the door and was screaming. His friend with the gun is important because he repeatedly said that he and said friend would shoot us. My window was on the second floor, facing the street, and my stomach dropped when he saw me. I immediately dropped an army crawl to my little brother's room and hid in the closet. His window faced the backyard, I guess. My monkey brain felt safer there. I was the only one home and scared that if I breathed too loud that he would hear me. I was terrified. I didn't want to call the police because my dumb butt thought that he would hear that too. So I silently texted my mom. Police arrived about 20 minutes after my mom said that they were on the way. He and his friend were taken into custody after that same friend had gotten him out on bond. His friend did have a gun and he didn't. Bottom line, I was able to get a restraining order. I'm strictly sober and definitely in therapy after that. My grandparents lived in a house located in a very secluded area surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor is around half a mile from their house. Whenever my grandfather has work in town for a couple of days, he calls me home to take care of my grandmother who suffers from arthritis. One night it had started raining really heavily and there was a power cut the entire night. It was really windy, and since the house is pretty old, you can hear a lot of creaking sounds. But around 1 in the morning in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud knocking sound at the front door. My grandmother was still sleeping and I didn't want to wake her up. The noise had freaked me out because it was impossible for someone to be out at this time, in the rain outside of our house. But I thought that maybe it was my grandfather who had had some emergency and had to come home at this time of night. As I walked to the main door to see who it was, the knocking had stopped. I saw that our dog was standing in the corner of the room, looking at the door with his tail between his legs. He looked super scared to me. I figured that something really wasn't right, and that if someone was outside of my door, it obviously wasn't my grandfather. I went upstairs to see who it was through the window, but I only saw a shadow. I'm not sure if it was actually a person's shadow, or just a hallucination of my sleepy mind. I did not open that door and I went right back to bed. The creepiest part was, the next morning I saw muddy footprints on my front porch and a broken door handle.